Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. I get more questions about this than probably everything else put together. And it's the old Dendrobium nobiles. Now, basically, what it says in the books in principle is actually correct. Yes, you did hear that right. But what the books don't do is talk about the exceptions and those that misbehave, and perhaps what we might want to do about them. So let's have a go at that today. Right, first one up is my Dendrobium prima donna, that is a shadow of what it once was, but for today's video is absolutely perfect because first of all it's doing something very odd. It's pushing a bud out on the apex of one of the canes. This is a cane that has bloomed most of the way down, so it may or may not push out some buds lower down, don't know yet. It has actual buds here, yeah, and also if you look carefully on this really old leafless cane, we've got a nub in there which could be blooms, could remotely be a kiki, who knows. But then we've got last year's cane, which didn't grow quite as large as I was expecting, which has no nubbins whatsoever showing on it at the moment. And then down here we have a new growth starting. It's got everything on it, and this is what I'm getting at. I won't say it's misbehaving, but it could catch people out that have only got this information from the books that's sort of regulated and has specific dates on it, and the plants are supposed to behave exactly according to that. And of course, as soon as your plant deviates from that, you start to panic. Well, there's no point in panicking, that will achieve absolutely nothing. Right, so what have we got on here? What we've got are some nubbins. These are the start of probably flower spikes, but could potentially be kikis. Kikis on pure nobile type hybrids, you know, the ones that haven't got oddities mixed in with them, are unlikely to produce kikis. They don't do it often, they don't make a habit of it. That doesn't mean to say they don't, they do on occasions. Right, so I would say if your plant is in the stage where the nubbins are showing and you haven't got any new growths, yours is probably about right for the schedule for this time of year, coming into February. Yeah? Noblies can be doing this at the beginning of January. They might not be doing it at all yet until mid-February. The variety of what goes into these nobile hybrids accounts for some of these differences. Yeah? It's not, if the same plants went all into the hybrids, they'd all be the same, wouldn't they? So obviously there are some differences. And different nobile hybrids are combined that have already had oddities put into them in their past, and they can be reintroduced. So there's all sorts going on. Right, so if I had a nobile that was just doing some nubbins and nothing else, it would not be getting any feed and it would be getting very little water. What would I do with this one then? Well, this one is coming into growth. If I don't water, that growth will take its energy from the existing canes. On this plant, would that be a big deal? And the simple answer is no, because it has plump canes, including at least one new one. So I'd say no. But what else is it doing? It's coming into bloom soon. Well, that's going to take some energy out of the existing plant as well. And combine the two together, and for me, those buds override everything else on this plant, because that's the point in the past earlier than this, in fact, that I would say you start increasing your watering and introducing a little feed. If you can imagine those buds, say a week ago, before the buds showed, but the spike itself had pushed away from the cane. It's no longer a nubbin, it's obviously a flower spike, about a centimetre, centimetre and a half long, depending on how potentially large the blooms are going to be, obviously. That's the point I've always started introducing a bit of feed and watering a bit more regularly, so that those spikes that have got to form the buds and then produce those large blooms that we're looking forward to doesn't drain the plant. You're helping it, you're getting some help in there. That doesn't drain the plant. So when it does come back into growth, it's not starting from a dodgy position where it's used up an awful lot of its stored energy, and it's got to sort of start almost from scratch. So by introducing the feed and increasing the watering at that stage, you've left a lot of energy still in the plant, so that when it does come into growth, it'll push on fast. And that's when you need to keep up, obviously. So if this had no buds, just nubbins, and a new growth, I wouldn't introduce the feed yet. That little growth would have to fend for itself. If it was a weak plant, then I'd consider, as those nubbins push away, actually just push them off the cane and put the energy into the growth. And we'll wait for the blooms till next year, possibly just leave a couple so that we do get some blooms. But, take away some of the usage of the stored resources and put them back into the growths. So that, as I say, that one's got most things going on. And as an example of a nobile, it's not a particularly spectacular one. That, believe it or not, when this was in its heyday, that got best in show, best hybrid in show at Wessex Orchid Society. And at that particular time it was a bush. It was almost 3 foot by 3 foot. It was a large bush, and at that particular season it was a smothering, an absolute smothering of blooms. Anyway, that's that one. This plant will get bigger. It's now got some decent roots. Yeah? So this year I'm expecting the growth to be a lot more spectacular. It's made a start. If I only get that one new growth this year, I'll be disappointed. You need to get busy, you do. Right, so that's the first one. Now let's go to one that I would say, after I've had a bit of coffee, is behaving normally. It's behaving itself to a degree. We don't want to trade, do we? Now this is a new one to me, so I haven't seen the blooms, but we will see them. There are going to be some. So what I have here is a plant that I would class as an unknown. I know what it's called. I'll do pop-ups for the names. I know what it's called, and I know what it was like when I got it, and I know what it's done since. And that's its history, relatively short history. It had this little cane here, and then it had this long cane here. So this would be classed as a previous year's growth. And then this was the new growth that I've pushed on to a nice big fat healthy looking cane, and in the pot is a decent root system. You can't see it because it's still in the black pot. I haven't repotted this. I got this back from Marius. It was one of Jeff's plants that went to Marius for the orchid collection, but I was allowed to have this one back, mainly because it's a hybrid, not a species. But as far as what this one is doing, on the previous year's growth, it's got nubbins. Now it's only got 2 so far, but the chances are the lower leaf joints will push on, as those have only just started to show, literally. This is sort of doing what I would expect it to do. This oldest cane over here could potentially produce a nubbin, don't know. But I don't know what the new cane's going to do, because I haven't had the plant long enough. Because under normal circumstances, a nobile will produce a growth starting at the beginning of year 1, and you push it on hard, feed and water well through the growing season. And remember, with nobiles, they don't need high light to grow. A lot of the original nobile comes from relatively cooler deciduous forests. So in its growing season, when the rains come, it's quite shaded. So we don't need high light in the growing season. And therein lies a little bit of a secret, is that your contrast between your light levels during the growing season and your light levels in your winter resting season will be far greater if you keep it shady in the summer. Don't give it the bright light. Fool it into thinking that's your light level, and then when we get into late autumn, look how bright we're going to make it. The contrast is what you're after. Yeah, so as I haven't had this plant long enough, I don't know what it's going to do on last year's growth, because that's when this one grew. But under normal circumstances, most nobiles will push up a cane during the growing season. Excuse me, you rest that cane through the winter and it will bloom late winter, early spring. Now with some of them, and it does tend to be the ones that bloom on the latest growth, i.e. the previous year's growth, they often bloom later. Yeah? The ones that seem to bloom the earliest, you know, sort of almost in the middle of winter, like January, early February, seem to be the ones that bloom on not the previous year, but the one before that. Yeah? So if this cane in year 1 grew, in year 2 it wouldn't do much, and it would bloom at the start of year 3. But not quite sure what this one's going to do. But I have a nice plump healthy cane that is perfectly strong enough to bloom should it be that type of plant. And it may just be that this cane will bloom but later in the year. And don't be surprised if you get a nobile that pushes out some buds in the middle of summer. That prima donna has a habit of doing that. It has its mass blooming late winter, early spring, sort of March into April, and then it'll have another go a bit later on where it'll push out another couple of spikes with 2 or 3 blooms on, often in the middle of summer. So that's another one. And then we need more coffee. The nuthatch is in the garden, so he is around. I don't know what it comes in to feed on. It just pecks around on the ground, but it never stays long. It comes down out of that conifer tree and it's gone, but it's here. That's the good bit. Right, not all nobiles need to go in a pot. This one came from Rachel as a kiki. Nearly didn't make it. This really did struggle at first. It would not get going. And you can see that the progression was painfully slow, starting from here, you know, and then grew a cane that wasn't much better than the kiki, you know, and then the next one wasn't much better, but it was fatter. And then it started going last year and produced a decent cane. Sorry, the year before. And then last year it produced another decent cane. Longer, but not as fat. And now it has nubbins on this cane. So this isn't last year's growth, this is the previous year's growth. And I'd say that is relatively normal for this type of nobile hybrid. This is Comet King. It's a very old cross, Comet King. This one's been around a while. Lovely large flowers as well. And this can grow into a bit of a monster. This is progressively probably going to get a bit bigger. Now, some of you are not going to like this, but I will say that if this is mounted, unless I can really keep up with the watering and feeding in the growing season, I might not get the best out of this plant on a mount. I won't say it'll suffer, but it might not produce the largest, bestest canes that it's capable of producing on a mount. Nonetheless, it will grow fine. I mean, it's produced a really good root system. all around the mount. Hardly any moss left on that mount now. It's almost totally aerial. And this year we're going to be working a little differently on our mounts. Those that have plenty of moss that's live moss and it's okay, they'll carry on as normal. The ones that originally had the zombie moss without too much of it and it's faded to almost nothing, these are going to start getting thrown in the Vander bucket. Now, as a consequence, the feed in the Vander bucket will not be quite as strong as perhaps it has been in the past. So anyway, so the Vanders might not be getting fed quite as high as they used to. But there'll be an awful lot more plants will do better. You have to sort of weigh up the odds. So anyway, this one I would say is behaving almost normally. This cane produced some blooms last year. Yeah. Now it's going to produce some more this year. Looks like 2, possibly 3 nubbins there. They tend to have 2, sometimes 3 blooms because they're large. What this cane's going to do, I don't know. We'll wait and see. Is this one that will have its initial blooms at the normal time and perhaps a few more later on this cane? We shall see. But you can see already that there are times when a cane will bloom and it will bloom again the next year lower down the cane on nodes that haven't been used yet. Once a node has been used, it will never bloom again. And this is where you work out, do you want to keep the cane or not in your large plants where you're getting old leafless canes that have been there quite a while. You look down the cane and you think, what's the lowest point that this cane is likely to bloom from, and has it already done it? And if it has, that cane's not going to bloom again. So when you're thinning your plants out. Anyway, that one's behaving normally. Normal for that one anyway. I'm not sure there is an absolute normal. Oh, the nuthatch is back again now, he's on the decking. So we're going to catch that on film. I hope it's a male, because if it's a male it will colour up soon for its breeding season, because they're a sort of slaty colour on their back, a greyish blue, and their front is orange. Lovely, and they've got a black stripe, so they're very attractive birds. And out of all the birds that run on trunks like woodpeckers, tree creeper, the nuthatch is the only one that can run down. So it can turn upside down and run down the trunk of a tree. Quite impressive. The grip they must have is incredible. Right, last one. And this one is my genuine misbehaving one, and it has been since I got it. It has every combination you can possibly imagine on here, and it's not quite settled yet, so I'm hoping this year it might do. And basically what we've got here is 2-year-old growths, which tend to be the ones in the centre with all the X nubbins on, like this one. In other words, you know, we've bloomed all down that one. Yeah, and we may be losing a few leaves now. And then we've got one in the centre there that's lost all of its leaves, as has this one. They're the two strapped together, they're enormous. And then we've got one here, that's an old one. Again, leaves coming off. And then we've got new ones. We have a new one here and a new one here. So those are last year's growths, and they did well. This is quite a monster of a plant, this one. But what have we got then? On the 2-year-old cane here we have a nubbin, and that cane has bloomed before, and it bloomed in the summer, and now it's going to bloom late winter, early spring on the same cane it bloomed on last summer. This one here also bloomed last summer. This one doesn't look like it's going to bloom again this time of year. And then we've got the 2 new growths that are showing no signs of nubbins at all. I suspect they will bloom in the summer at the top. And then next late winter, early spring, we might get a few more from lower down. So this one's not settled. Although that could be its pattern, that could be what it's going to do. And it's another one that's pushing out buds from the very apex of a cane. So that's 2 I've got doing that this year, and I'm not sure I've seen that before. But this gives you an idea that there are nobiles that can grow large. Yeah, they're not all medium-sized dendrobiums. Some of them can grow pretty monstrous canes. And you know, given the size of this one, that's its biggest so far. The 2 I grew last year didn't quite get to that size, but they're not far off. But then it did grow 2 rather than 1, you know. So as far as the base of this one is concerned, there are swellings, but I don't think they're signs of new growths yet. This one has that trait. It has very bulbous bases to its canes, very bulbous, and it looks like they're swelling to grow when in fact that's normal for these. But the new growths will come eventually. Right, so that's my set, my 4. I used to have quite a few more than that, and I used to have some strange mixes as well. I used to have that Firebird Stardust, and that definitely had unicum in it, with the orange and the shape and everything like that. That just kept producing kikis. That, you know, it bloomed as well, but it was just a kiki machine, that one. Anyway, so nobiles at this time of year could be doing any of those things. They could be doing nothing. They could be pushing out new growths. They could be pushing out the nubbins showing, and or new growths. They could be doing both. Their buds could be extending by now, and they could be doing that with or without new growths. Got all these combinations going on, and you have to make a decision based on the plant. What's important for this plant now? And like I said, if you've got nubbins and a new growth, some say that when the nubbin first shows, the plant hasn't decided whether that's going to be buds or a kiki. I'm not so sure. I've got a feeling the decision's already made. Yeah, it's difficult to prove. You would have to have one in exactly the right circumstances. Well, you'd need more than one to do the experiment. You'd need a few plants in exactly those circumstances, the nubbins just showing, and then one you'd have to start feeding and watering straight away, and the other one you wouldn't, and see if you can turn those nubbins into kikis by watering and feeding too soon, which is what some say is the cause of the kikis. You started watering and feeding too early and didn't give the plant chance to do its natural thing, which is produce the nubbins on into buds at the end of its rest period. So you can make your own choice there. I don't know one way or the other. Looks like we have some rain again. Oh well, that'll cut the video short because of the noise level. We had some very hard rain earlier on, which is why I probably won't bother going around the house today. I'll leave it till next week now, see what the weather's like then. Yeah, so you've got to make the decision based on the plant. Now if I had a plant that the nubbins were just showing and it started to push up 2 or 3 new growths, I would probably go from just a trickle of water now and again to watering a little bit more frequently. Not going to the full soak, you know, it's not in its full growing mode yet, but just give a little bit more and perhaps a tiny little bit of feed to keep those growths not draining the plant. The other thing is, you see, if the growths push on and they're draining the plant, that doesn't leave a lot for the buds to form, does it? Without a bit of help from you. So you've got to think about what the plant's up to. If you've got no new growths and your nubbins start to move, that's perfect. That's doing exactly what's expected. And in my book, when the nubbins get to about a centimetre, centimetre and a half, something like that, you start increasing your watering and introducing a little bit of feed so that those buds have got something to work with. You'll get the maximum number of buds per spike and nice big blooms, yeah, because they're not restricted They're not draining the energy out of the canes. So, but when you get a mixture, it's a plant by plant decision. You just have to decide for yourself. But once those nubbins push away from the cane, you can tell quite quickly whether they're going to be buds or kikis, because the kikis tend to start to grow up. Buds tend to start growing away. If they grew up, there'd be no room for the flowers to open, would there? So they tend to push out more near to a right angle to allow the buds some room between the leaves. It's just a natural thing. So yeah, and obviously if and when your blooms finish and your growing season is in full swing and your new growth start, that's your feed and water well bit. And the trick, keep them relatively shady. Yeah, those canes will push on, they don't need bright light. And then when you come into autumn and you start slowing things down, you get your terminal leaves start to form, and all that's left for those canes to do is to swell up. They don't necessarily stop growing just because the terminal leaf's there. They still swell up to get maximum reserves to go into their resting period, where you've reduced your feed down to nothing. And once you get into, I would say, beginning of December, maybe the end of November, depends on when they stop growing really, how soon you do this, but that's the point where you give them the maximum light you can. You can't give them too much at that point, I don't think. You could probably burn them with a artificial light by getting it too close, but they'll take full sun through glass at that time of year, they'll be fine. And that's the point where you need to drop your temperature as best you can. Often difficult in the home. And I'll say it again with the nobile hybrids, if you don't do that to any great extent, you'll probably still get your blooms anyway. You might not get as many, and it might not be as good a blooming as it could have been. So if you can do that shade to bright light trick, and it is good light, and you can drop those temperatures down compared to what it's used to, especially at night, you're liable to get a good blooming. So, nobiles, some people really struggle with trying to get those to go. The easiest thing to say is watch your plant, react to your plant. But there are certain set, I won't say rules, guidances that in the books are fair enough. Yeah, I did say that. You might not ever hear it again. But they do give a good guidance for all of the nobiles that are behaving themselves. And it's based on the species. And if you don't follow those sort of rules with the species, the chances are it won't bloom at all. They are a little bit more finicky than the hybrids. Anyway, Dendrobium nobiles. That'll do for today. Thanks for dropping by and good luck with them. I think they're worthwhile dendrobiums. It's a fair old few of the hybrids nowadays have got quite long lasting blooms as well, so you're getting, and you've got something that grows well. When those new growths push out, you get good strong canes without a huge amount of effort and worry, so they're an easy plant to grow into a nice big plant. Watch your repotting, again, as with all plants, they're liable to lose some of the older roots at repotting time, and make sure you've got a new set of roots on the go, actively starting at your point when you repot. And again, a lot of people will say, and I've said it in the past as well, they seem to do better in a smaller pot, a bit cramped up. But again, I'll always say, on top of that, it's not necessarily the pot. But what a small pot does is it stops you, the person, overwatering it and ending up with a soggy media and soggy roots, which will go down. So that's the reason the smaller pot works, rather than, the plant thinks, oh, I'm much happier in a smaller pot. They don't do that sort of thinking. Not really. And if you think about it, if it was in the wild and it was on a branch, the roots would grow till the plant decided they were long enough, big enough, and it had a good hold on the branch. And a fair bit of the root system in the wild is to hold the plant on the branch. They're attachment roots. and then their secondary function is to hydrate the plant. But it's not going to do a lot of good if it falls off the branch into the ground, is it? So anyway, that'll do. See you next time. Bye for now.